At the end of there, we were talking about if Democrat votes make a difference in this district. We heard what Professor Monroe had to say too about that topic. About are there any motivation for them to jump out in this race? I guess that's the question. Is there?
Well, look, this district has a 20-point Republican registration advantage. And so I think even with two Republicans on the ballot, we may see some Democrat turnout, but I expect it'll be very low. And given that, only about 14.5% of ballots have been returned so far in this district as of yesterday, and about half of those in Kern County, I think that there's just very little motivation for Democrats to turn out. And I expect that percentage of that return will be even smaller among Democrats. So I guess short answer, no, I don't see it.
Yeah, and Brittany, I know you know the district pretty well, and what are your thoughts on that as well? Do you think there will be enough Democrat votes to sway this election?
I mean, as Blake mentioned, we know that the Central Valley is probably the most ruby red area of California. If I'm a Democrat, I'm coming out to this election to hopefully stop, on their end, someone who is too conservative, too far right. However, we also know that traditionally Republicans tend to vote more in the primaries and in special elections too. So hopefully, I think it's important to voice your opinion. I think for all of us, whether even if it's only two Republicans on the ballot and maybe Dems don't feel represented, but we'll see. I don't expect it'll be too much to sway this election, but I'm sure some folks will come out.
Does anyone care about the endorsement from Trump or McCarthy? I mean, is that something that gets maybe outside of the hardcores someone to go out and vote for Boudreaux over Fong?
I would think that would be the case if it was if Boudreaux was a candidate that played to the middle from the beginning. I mean, if you don't have to think back very far, probably January, there was speculation that Boudreaux was going to get the Trump endorsement. And so, obviously voters and have short memories and many wouldn't have been aware of that. But I guess my point is just, I don't see Fong as being this flag bearer for Trump or for the sort of far right, establishment of the Republican Party. And so it's harder to imagine that that's going to be a galvanizing thing for Democrats as sort of some anti-Trump push, especially in a special election like this.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think, as you mentioned, that Boudreaux falls under that less conservative line that someone else across the country would maybe fit under. He's not a Nikki Haley acolyte or anyone who's following her particularly closely. So he's probably further to the right than Fong on some issues. Is there any issue that you think got voters to the polls? Unlike, I mean, it just doesn't seem like there's one motivating factor that both candidates aren't trying to cover in their part of their campaign messaging.
Well, I think there's not really one single issue at this point, but immigration is definitely something I think that's top of mind for a lot of folks right now and has consistently been in the news, in the headlines. But in this special election, I don't see it happening where there's one specific issue driving voters to the polls.
Yeah, I guess a follow-up to that too would be what we've heard from Boudreaux. What I talked to him on Thursday was almost seeming to disclose that if this is a beatdown, he doesn't really want to push that hard in November because it may be more destructive than constructive for him. Is that a good strategy? I guess what does a beatdown look like? Is it something like 60s to 30s or something in that sort of ratio, or what I guess would be considered a good night for him as well?
Well, we already had two elections for this seat earlier this year, right? We had the special election, which was March 19th, and we had Super Tuesday, the regular primary. Fong was up by nearly 18 points in the primary, and then Boudreaux was able to close that back just slightly to 16.5 points in the special election for this seat. I think that ultimately civil discourse, as I already said, I think civil discourse is important. It's important for voters to have candidates and choice to vote for. I do understand, though, that this is the type of industry that really takes a toll on you. I think we've already seen a pretty significant differences in the polls too. So 20 points is already a lot. 16 and a half points is already a lot. I don't know if he's going to be able to close that gap between now and November, but you never know what'll happen.
I mean, the interesting thing about this one too, right, is like all those percentages are from a multi-candidate race, right? In both cases, right? They're both this huge field. And so, Will, you talk about sort of like, what does it look like, a 60-30, sort of beat down, I mean, it could look like that in the sense that, now this is the first time we're going to see Fong and Boudreaux go head to head with no one else in the field. And that for me is the one piece of intrigue, right? So, even if Boudreaux picks up every single voter that went to the rest of the field, he still doesn't beat Fong if Fong just retains the percentage that he had. But it's obviously much, much closer in that case. On the other hand, right, if Fong scoops up, the majority of the remainder, it could be this huge, he could lap, Boudreaux in terms of having, double his percentage or something like that. So, I think that will be telling in terms of the way that Boudreaux wants to push between now and November, because, if he does do better than everyone expects, and he, he closes the gap, to 10% or 8% or something like that. Well, now all of a sudden, maybe it is worth it to be a little bit of a disruptor and push harder for the November election. And on the other hand, right, maybe you hold off on such an aggressive tact if you feel like you just have too much ground to make up.
Yeah, I was going to say my last question for us, I think, is, along the lines of, we kind of see it around the country. We have a couple of presidential candidates that are maybe particularly unpopular at the top of tickets. In this race, too, you would think perhaps in those primaries that it would have been a Republican versus a Democrat, but there's enough Republicans that, wanted a different choice, at least so it seems, or perhaps it was that Democrat turnout was low, which we do kind of know in some respect. Do you think that enough defection from, this preferred candidate of Fong, or even, of course, the Boudreaux upset sends a signal nationally to anyone? No.
I agree with Nathan here. What he was saying earlier, that Boudreaux was close to potentially getting the Trump endorsement prior to Fong jumping in. I think that one way or another, these are fairly conservative candidates. I don't think that it would serve as a bellwether for the rest of the nation. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, back to the question about, is there some issue here that's going to define things? The problem is, these candidates are just so closely aligned on a lot of issues, that you almost have to invent, differences between candidates when they're this close. And as a result, right, any sort of movement one direction or the other just doesn't tell us very much about the general mood of the electorate, I think, between the two candidates, or at least it doesn't tell us anything that we can easily interpret. And so I just don't see that as being a strong indicator of sort of national tides, no matter what happens.
There's not much that's separating any of these candidates as far as positions. The only 3 things I think I was really able to pick up on this was going to be that Boudreaux says no Ukraine aid. I don't know how much people here are tuned into that. Perhaps Fong is considered tougher on the border than Boudreaux, because Boudreaux sees, he wants more immigration judges and things like that. More, I guess, the Valadeo route as far as immigration policy goes. But I don't know. They're both tough on the border. It doesn't seem like there's much of a difference there. And the only third thing was that whole thing on endorsements. Once, the sheriff of Kern County went to go endorse Vince Fong, and Shannon Grove did as well, who was thought to really be the heir apparent for this seat. Is there really anything, Professor, that you can pick on between the two that's a major difference outside of the endorsements and those slight policy differences?
No, I don't see big policy differences going on here. What you have, I think, is more how important it is writ large for the Republican Party and what's going on. I'd spend less time or think less about the policy differences between these two, and more about where Vince Fong is going, what's the legacy of Kevin McCarthy, where the Republican Party is headed, what that looks like. That's certainly something I would concentrate on. I mean, Fong wins tonight, he gets seated. The Republicans get to 218 votes. Okay, but they still can't stay whole, even though they have that majority, because of the various caucuses that are going on in there. So I think that actually plays to some issues. There might be some shades of difference on immigration and only going to be shades of difference on crime. And since those will be two major themes for Republicans this fall, as they move forward, I think it doesn't, in that sense, matter for this particular seat or for them where they're going to play.
Anything else that you guys would like to touch upon before we jump off here? And by the way, I want to say thank you. I put it as optional, but I'm really happy to see everybody on.
I'll throw on one more thing, Will, if you're looking for more something to throw over your B-roll. So one of the things that I think is really interesting in terms of a choice for Boudreaux along these lines of whether it be disruptive is for Boudreaux, right? I think the real prize here is actually not the November election, right? He's got an opportunity here to go from an elected sheriff to being in a really high profile race with another Republican, where he's going to get a lot of attention. He's going to have relatively a lot of money put into him so that he grows his name recognition and his brand for moving up, I think, the elected ladder in the South Valley, on the sort of platform built, I think, by a losing congressional campaign, right? And we sometimes, I think of these sort of long shot losing congressional campaigns as harmful to candidates. I don't see it that way, right? Because with Fong being the heir apparent, but Boudreaux, I think, being seen as a serious candidate, right? There might be an assembly or a Senate seat that opens up that he becomes a front runner for in pretty near term. And so I actually think that there's a lot of savvy to Boudreaux, and I think there's potentially a lot of value for him in running a solid campaign, but not being too disruptive in November. So he sort of keeps, his place in line for the Republican, establishment in the South Valley to be able to make a run at a seat in the future. And mark my words, right? Like if he runs a solid campaign, you're going to see Boudreaux come back and make a really strong run at a state legislative seat in the next 2 or 3 cycles.
So what he has to do is then do better than expected. If he's at that place to do that, then he just.
I mean, do you think so? I mean, I guess David, I wonder like what it means to be like part of the thing here is like what's expected, right? Because in that sense, because it's such a weird run. I mean, I think he has to do as well enough to seem serious, right? Like I think his I guess I would say for me, like the standard's even lower than that, right? Like he doesn't, because everybody sort of thinks Fong is gonna, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, he's got it. If he's in the mid-30s, I think he's in a place where he can build. If he is back in the low 30s or the high 20s, if it's 60-40, let's say. Okay, even though it's low turnout, I think spot on that he has an opportunity to go. If he's at 38, 37, 36, he's right there. Even though that's still a shellacking, but you just have to do better than expected, I think, to then bump and do that.
And you think that some growth between this one and that's the other interesting question is like how much does it change in a higher turnout election, right? We might see 120,000 votes cast in the special, the general, first special. And so, that dropped off from like 160,000 in the primary, right? Which is a similar field. What are we going to see? 100,000 votes tonight? 90,000 votes? That'd be a high number.
Yeah.
And we're going to go from that to say 300, like 250, 300,000.
Yeah, 280, 275, somewhere right in there. Yeah.
So it's like we're talking about increasing the electorate by almost like by 3 or 4 fold. And that to me is like going to be the really interesting question, is what the change looks like too, from the primary to the general, from the special general to the regular general. So, I think there's a lot of intrigue here, even if there's not a question of who's going to win it.
Right. It'll be the gap or the space and doing better than expected. Kind of that number is what I think.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Murcia with Eyewitness News Bakersfield Now on YouTube. Thank you for checking out our YouTube channel where we have tons of great content to choose from. While you're here, go ahead and click on the subscribe button right there. That way you can stay up to date on all the things related within Kern County. Thanks for watching.